9 years after the end of my marriage, I found myself living a life devoid of the passion and romance that had once been so vibrant. The emotional toll of a failed relationship left me feeling hollow, almost detached from the idea of love. It wasn't just the heartbreak of the marriage ending, it was the loss of shared dreams and a deep connection with someone who had been a central part of my life for so long. I began to doubt if I even believed in love anymore. That was until one seemingly ordinary day on a train when something happened that completely altered the course of my life in ways I could never have predicted. It was a brisk autumn afternoon as I boarded the train. A cool breeze swept through the station, sending chills up my spine as I tightened my long coat around me to block out the cold. The train was crowded, as usual during rush hour, and I stood in the aisle, scanning for an available seat. My gaze moved indifferently across the faces around me until it stopped on a young man by the window. He couldn't have been older than 24 or 25. His slightly messy dark hair and faint scruff gave him a rugged yet youthful charm that was impossible to ignore. His focus was on the book in his hands, but there was something about his presence that captivated me. Without realizing it, I found myself standing a few feet away, unable to look away as my eyes lingered longer than they should have. When the train jolted forward, I lost my balance momentarily, grabbing a nearby pole for support. That's when his eyes met mine for the first time. The intensity in his gaze sent a rush of warmth through me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Embarrassed by my reaction, I quickly averted my eyes, but I could still sense him watching me as though trying to decipher the reason behind my flustered state. For the next few stops, I avoided looking in his direction, but I couldn't shake the magnetic pull I felt toward him. Each time I glanced up, his gaze was still on me, unwavering and intense. There was an undeniable draw, something about him that made me want to be closer, to learn more about him. I didn't know anything about his life, and yet, in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. When the train began to empty at a larger station, I finally found an open seat across from him. My attempt at casualness belied the racing of my heart and the swirling emotions within me: curiosity, desire, and a nervous thrill. She couldn't potentially be her soulmate. Her future lover could damn well be someone else. If only I could find him. He was at least a decade younger than me, which only heightened the allure. Since my marriage had ended, I hadn't felt temptation like this. And now, here I was, sitting across from a complete stranger who made my pulse race in a way I couldn't ignore. As the train resumed its journey, I risked another glance in his direction. This time, he smiled. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it sent shivers down my spine. I returned the smile, and for a brief moment, it felt as if the rest of the world had disappeared, leaving only the two of us. The noise of the train faded into the background as I became consumed by the moment. After a few minutes, he closed his book and leaned forward slightly, locking his eyes on mine. "You seem like you have a lot on your mind," he said, his voice deep and smooth. I let out a soft laugh, more out of nervousness than amusement. "You could say that. I replied, trying to sound composed. It's been a long day. He nodded knowingly, his gaze never breaking. I can tell, he said with quiet confidence. It's written all over your face. The way he spoke, with such boldness and directness, made my heart skip a beat. I was drawn to his self-assurance, something I hadn't encountered in years. We continued chatting, making small talk about books and the weather, but an undeniable tension lingered in the air. The chemistry between us was palpable, even though neither of us acknowledged it outright. Each word he spoke seemed to pull me closer, and I could feel the heat between us building with every passing moment. My body reacted in ways that both surprised and excited me, and I could sense he felt it too. The energy between us crackled, a silent anticipation growing stronger with each second. But when I glanced down, I saw his fingers graze mine, an unspoken invitation that sent a thrill through me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I was frozen, unsure of how to respond. Then, without thinking, I turned my hand over, letting his fingers intertwine with mine. The touch was electric, igniting a surge of desire I hadn't felt in years. All the emotions and longing I had buried deep within me seemed to come alive in me, and I suddenly wanted to be raised up and sank to my knees. Ah! I squeezed his hand gently, and in the darkness, I could feel the warmth of his smile. For several minutes, we sat in silence, our hands intertwined with the low hum of the train and the distant murmur of passengers as the only background noise. It was a moment of pure connection, an unspoken understanding between two strangers brought together by chance. I had no idea what would happen next, but in that instant, it didn't matter. All that existed was the fire ignited between us in the realization that something had awakened inside me. When the train lights flickered back on and it began moving again, we slowly let go of each other's hands, but the invisible bond remained, stronger than ever. He met my gaze with a playful glint in his eyes, silently hinting that this was just the start. I could feel he was right. As the train approached my stop, a wave of dread swept over me. I didn't want this moment to end, or to return to the monotony and isolation that had defined my life for so long. Just as I stood to leave, he reached out, grabbing my hand and pulling me back toward him. "Wait," he said, his voice low and urgent. My heart pounded as I hesitated. I knew I should leave, that this was just a fleeting moment with a stranger on a train, but something deep inside urged me to stay, to see where this connection could lead. Without saying a word, I sat back down beside him, and for the rest of the ride, we remained close. Our bodies lightly pressed together as the train rushed through the city. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, it didn't matter. After 9 long years of feeling lost and disconnected, I had found something real, something worth holding on to. When the train reached his stop, he stood and turned to me, his eyes full of promise. "Come with me," he said, softly but firmly. Without thinking, I rose and followed him, stepping off the train into the unknown. That night marked a turning point in my life, It wasn't just about the physical connection, although that was undeniably intense. It was about finding someone who made me feel alive again, someone who reminded me that I was still capable of love and passion. In the years that followed, our bond grew deeper, and I realized that life's most unexpected moments often lead to the most incredible journeys. Now, looking back on that day, I can't help but smile. I never imagined a random encounter on a train would spark a love story that transformed my life. But that's the nature of love. It finds you when you least expect it. To anyone who feels lost or uncertain, know this: love can appear in the most unlikely places, even on a crowded train in the heart of a bustling city. You just have to be open to it, to take a leap of faith and see where it leads. You never know who you might meet or what might happen when you let go of fear and embrace the possibilities. As I followed him off the train that night, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting shadows across the streets as we walked in silence. I didn't ask where we were headed. I didn't need to. I trusted the moment and the undeniable energy pulling us together. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt before, a magnetic connection that seemed to have a life of its own. We wandered through winding streets, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, until we arrived at a small, dimly lit cafe tucked away from the city's noise. Inside, the cozy warmth embraced us as we sat in a corner booth, the outside world fading away. We talked about everything and nothing, our conversation flowing naturally. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened by my past, free from the sadness that had lingered since my marriage ended. Instead, I felt light, as though I could breathe again. Time slipped by unnoticed. Before long, the night gave way to early morning, and the cafe was nearly empty. We sat in comfortable silence, sipping the last of our drinks. He reached across the table, his fingers grazing mine, and that familiar spark jolted through me. There was a question in his eyes, one he didn't need to voice. I had a decision to make: return to my safe, predictable life, or take a chance on the unknown, something both exhilarating and terrifying. The weight of the choice bore down on me, but deep down, I already knew the answer. My heart had decided long before my mind did. We left the cafe together, the streets quiet in the soft glow of early morning. His hand found mine, and a sense of peace washed over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. I was simply living in the present, letting the moment carry me wherever it wanted to go. When we reached his apartment, I paused, doubts racing through my mind. But as he turned to me, his eyes filled with warmth and something deeper, my uncertainties melted away. I followed him inside, my heart pounding, as anticipation thickened the air. He led me through the dim hallway to his bedroom, each step feeling like a move toward something new, something thrilling. He turned to face me, his eyes searching mine for permission. No words were needed. We both understood what we wanted. Gently, he reached out, his fingers tracing down my cheek, igniting a palpable heat between us. Before I knew it, we were kissing, a kiss charged with passion and longing, the kind that makes the world disappear. The rest of the night was a blur of sensation, his hands on my skin, the warmth of his body against mine, the overwhelming feeling of being truly alive. It wasn't just the physical closeness that left me breathless. It was the way he made me feel seen and understood, something I hadn't felt in years. There was a certain intensity to it, a sense of urgency, as though we both understood that this moment was something extraordinary, something neither of us wanted to let go of. As dawn began to break, we lay in silence, wrapped in each other's arms, while soft light filtered through the curtains. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts racing with everything that had unfolded, trying to make sense of what this night had meant to me. It wasn't just about the passion or the thrill, it was about discovering something I hadn't realized was missing from my life. It was about feeling truly alive again. In the stillness of the morning, he turned to me and softly whispered, "I've been waiting for someone like you." His words lingered in the air, heavy with significance, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. I didn't know what the future held for us, whether this was a fleeting encounter or the beginning of something deeper, but for the first time in years, I didn't care. I was ready to take the leap, ready to let myself fall. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, from the exhilaration of newfound love to the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Yet, through it all, I couldn't stop reflecting on how an ordinary train ride had led me to such an extraordinary connection. It was a reminder that life often surprises us when we least expect it, and that some of the most beautiful experiences come from the most unexpected places. As we spent more time together, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't dared to in years. I shared my past with him, the pain of my failed marriage and the long, difficult years I had spent trying to rebuild my life. In return, he opened up about his own experiences, his struggles, and his victories. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt and fear, but we faced those challenges together, growing closer with each day that passed. Looking back, I now realize that meeting him wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a pivotal moment, the start of a new chapter in my life. It reminded me that love doesn't always arrive in the way you expect it to. Sometimes it sneaks up on you when you're not looking, catching you by surprise. But when it does, it's worth the risk, worth the leap into the unknown. Now, 9 years after the end of my marriage, I could never have imagined finding love again in such an unexpected place, with someone who brought me back to life in ways I'd forgotten were possible. As I sit here writing these words, I can't help but smile at the memory of that fateful train ride and the young man who changed everything for me. So if you're feeling lost or uncertain, wondering if love will ever find its way back into your life, remember this: sometimes the most unexpected moments can lead to the greatest adventures. All you have to do is remain open to the possibilities and trust that when the timing is right, love will find you, just as it did for me. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more tales of love, passion, and the unexpected twists that life so often delivers.